Hey guys, it's Jackie. Today we're going to talk about continuing a two-part presentation. So in order to do that, the biggest thing we have to remember is that we're going to first review. We're going to review the information that we talked about in the previous session. Next, we're going to work on transitioning. So in order to transition, that means we want to smoothly get into that newest section that we're about to talk about. Next, we're going to just deliver the presentation we want to deliver. And then lastly, we're going to work on summarizing. So we're going to summarize the information not only that we've just covered, but also the information that we covered in both lessons, so that we're thinking of all of this as one comprehensive unit. So I have just a couple of questions to read for you today that we got from our Communicate Handbook from Smith, Myers, and Burkhalter. And they give us some questions to consider on each one of these categories that we're starting with and that we're thinking about. So that first section that we're looking at is related to reviewing. So in order to review, what we want to ask ourselves are what terms, what concepts do we need to know in order to review and continue this presentation? What sort of things do we have to review in order to continue on? So as far as like a technique, as far as that technical stuff that we need to work on, we need to think about how can we review and how can we review this without wasting any time? So that's the biggest thing that we need to think about whenever we're reviewing and starting some new thing. Next, as far as the transition, we need to think about the relationship between both parts of the presentation that we're working on. What's the relationship between those two lessons that we're giving? And in order to do that, we need to technically think about how can I clearly show that relationship between those two parts? How can I clearly show the relationship between lesson 1 and then lesson 2 that I'm giving today? The next thing that we're going to start kind of thinking about is actually the body of that second presentation, that lesson that we're giving. And what we want to think about is just very simply put, what exactly do we want our students to learn? And so in order to do that, we really need to think about how are we going to tell our students what we want them to learn. Next, we want to think about what are the main points of that we want to discuss in this general topic, not just for lesson 2, but generally, specifically, generally as far as this entire lesson is concerned. And in order to do that, we really need to think about, as far as technique goes, how can we clearly do this and make sure that our students are following? What sort of things do we need to make sure to do in order to figure out that our students are clearly understanding what we're trying to get them to know? The next question, as far as the body of that second presentation, we want to focus on examples. So what examples or supporting evidence do we need in order to really get across the details of our lesson? And so we need to ask ourselves, how can we make these details and these examples really interesting for our students? So that's those 3 questions are really important as far as asking ourselves what we need to do in order to really give the body of our second presentation. And then lastly, we're going into just summarizing the information. So in order to summarize, we need to think about what key points from both lessons do our students need to know and remember. In order to do that, we really need to think of how can we briefly summarize the information in both lessons. The biggest thing there would be about how can we recap everything without taking too much time. We want our students to understand that general body of what was said and really take away those key points and those key understandings from each of the 2 lessons. So there you have it, a really short lesson today. These are some short questions to ask ourselves when we are finishing up and continuing with the 2-part presentation. So remember, what we talked about was reviewing in the beginning. So we're going to review what we did in the first lesson, and then we're going to transition into our current material. Then we're going to give our material. Next, we're going to summarize what we did in not just this lesson, but in both lessons, so that we have one comprehensive unit. Okay, guys, good luck this week.